Good afternoon. My name is Jan Hernik. I'm editor-in-chief of the Warsaw Institute website, and this is the first episode of American Alert. And I'm honored to welcome in the first episode Professor David Jones, public affairs and foreign policy expert. Welcome, Professor David Jones. Good to have you with us here tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And of course, as we already said, this is American Alert, so we are going to discuss the issues of American policy, domestic policy, and foreign policy. And the title of today's talk is, of course, Current Challenges of American Politics. So we are going to start with a question to our today's guest. What is the state of the American political scene right now, in your opinion, Professor? And what is, in your opinion, the most important domestic policy issue or challenge of Joe Biden's administration?
Well, two questions. The first, the answer, in my opinion, is controversy. It's a very, very divided country and a very, very divided government. And I suppose we could use the same word slightly differently. From the Biden administration seems to be making it more divisive than less divisive, seems to be exacerbating the problem. And I wish it would not do that. In my opinion, I'm an independent voter. I've been both a Democrat and a Republican, a Democrat before I was a Republican. But in my view, Biden is terribly hurting the Democratic Party that has a very rich and deep history, historically helping some regions, South more than the rest, but also helping working people, whereas the Republican Party has a reputation for being a party of business. Now, I teach management. I, of course, like business, but I also respect very deeply working people. And I think that Biden is hurting that. And I would not be at all surprised if, with the 2022 midterm elections coming up, I think the 8th of November this year, 2022, that it's going to be a Republican landslide, and a lot of long-serving Democratic members of both houses of Congress will lose their seats or decide to retire rather than face that loss.
And where do you see those the biggest weaknesses or those divisive problems of Biden administration?
I think that there are several, at least four. The biggest one is Biden's departure from, there's a contrast effect with any presidential transition, and Biden's departure from not only the Trump agenda, but from the standard Democratic agenda, and his departure even from his own historical image as nothing left of center and probably right of center, his affiliation with Ku Klux Klan leader Robert Byrd when Byrd was Democratic leader of the Senate. That's one factor. Another factor is the time that we live in. In the United States, it's very divided. It's very divided, but in ways that are not immediately evident why. In other words, one looks at one news broadcast, the left-wing media would show everybody to be a racist. But the United States is not a racist country. It has had its historical problems with race. A third factor is, and this is a very sad factor, President Biden's very evidently declining health, probably from his two brain surgeries in 1988 that he recovered for a while from. And now he seems not to be able to remember very much. Yesterday, he even called a reporter governor, although he was hosting governors, I guess, online. And they cut off his question and answers because he he was addressing them incompetently. And I suppose the fourth one is the whole mix of policies, and that may be what you want to address more today. I'm not sure. That is the open border that doesn't serve anyone very well because it lets criminals in. The horrible rift between some citizens, oftentimes young black men, and the nation's police force. A perception by a lot of people, including minority people, that the Biden administration has cost them their jobs and their ability to support their family in favor of a handout. And the perception right now, growing as we speak, that the United States is willing to go up against the Russian Federation relatively unnecessarily in Ukraine on the pretext of stopping the Russian Federation from crossing Ukraine's border when the United States cannot even maintain its own border under this administration. I think those are the four key variables as I understand them.
Yes, Professor, you gave us the whole list. I have to add that, as far as I remember, Remain in Mexico was one of the first bills which were repealed by Joe Biden when he got the office. I remember from the presidential campaign, Joe Biden's campaign of 2020, he had a slogan of "Fight for the Soul of America." So I wanted to ask you, because I already know your stance on Joe Biden's domestic policy, don't you think that this slogan is some kind of exaggerated?
Well,
Not to say false.
well, no. Well, another problem with Biden is he vacillates. He vacillates either because he doesn't seem to feel it's in his interest to choose a course and follow it, or he vacillates because he can't remember what he was doing and saying yesterday, last week, last month, last year, much less the 47 years that he spent in the Senate, 4 of them presiding as vice president. So I don't know that I have to be very careful what I say. I have very important friends in both political parties in the United States. Certainly, I do not feel that the Democratic Party is something of the past, the way some Republicans believe it to be. Nor do I feel certainly that the Republican Party is something of the past, the way some Democrats seem to articulate. But I do feel that Biden, who said he was going to bring the country together, has done just the opposite. He's divided the country terribly. President Trump also was accused by and perceived by some as being divisive. We need the country to come together. Don't know if that answers your question, but don't know if I have one.
Yes, kind of. The next issue I would like to focus on is the declining support of the leaders of the Democratic Party right now. And here I noted today Quinnipiac University poll conducted in January this year, 2022. Joe Biden had only 33% of support, in contrary to 53% of people who disapprove his actions. It was also mentioned by USA Today. And speaking about another important Democratic politician, Kamala Harris, Vice President, another poll, Political Magazine, December last year, 28% support, the lowest vice president support in history. And I wanted to ask you, how can we explain this kind of very, very low, historical low in support? Is it because of this agenda, raising inflation, critical race theory support, as you already mentioned, racism? How do you think?
I think there are several factors involved in both President Biden and Vice President Harris, and they overlap somewhat, but not entirely. in President Biden's case, let's take him first. I think
Mhm.
the inflation is part of it. The inflation is largely energy related, and it's accompanied by food shortages in the United States and food shortages in other parts of the world, allies of the United States, including United Kingdom, for example, particularly. I haven't. I mean, there are some shelves that are empty in Poland. I don't think it's quite as critical. It's a smaller country with its own agricultural support. But Biden, I think that the big problem is with Biden is different by region. With states that border on the Mexican border, it's the border issue that's overriding. There are there are people coming across. There are no facilities for them, not enough facilities, and so they're putting their waste in people's front yards. They're making fools of themselves and of Biden. Now they're starting to drop off people in secret aircraft deliveries to airports during the night, and that I think is going to make more and more people nationwide in the United States become angry at Biden, same as people in Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico right now, the bordering states with Mexico. Now, as to Harris, it's a little bit different. Uh, she never had a national reputation. Biden very clearly chose her because he felt that she'd be worse than he is, and that would preclude an impeachment of him. Her background in San Francisco and her background when she was climbing the ladder, and then her background in the Senate would leave her weak in general. Uh, the interesting factor is that looking at polls in general, I'm doing a paper, just finishing it on polling, and Harry Truman was the only president that in the modern and postmodern period since the war who had down in the 30s, and he had down in the 30s only in the beginning. I would attribute to a contrast effect between him and Franklin Roosevelt, his predecessor. But Biden also has a contrast effect. Trump is the consummate business person. He put America back to work. He put especially minority males back to work in good jobs. And Biden, with the pipeline, the Canadian pipeline, just tore it apart. I think that's going to
You
come
mean
back to
Keystone?
her. Yeah, and Keystone, and then there's as to Harris, well, as to both of them really, it seems as if their strongest support is with black women, not with other minority women, not with Asian women or Hispanic women, but with black women. Probably secondly with upper and upper middle class white women, but not with men. And I think that's part of that is because uh, of the class, the social class divide. Part of that's because of the inflation, the economic situation. A lot of that is because of security. Some of that is over the Second Amendment gun control, where the Democratic Party is vehemently in favor of limiting access to guns, and now they seem to be trying to register everyone's firearm. And the And most males in the United States believe that they should have and retain keep the right to keep and bear arms. Now, I must disclose that I'm a life member of the National Rifle Association of America. That was a gift to me from a college friend, very wonderful college friend who is even more conservative than I am, a very wealthy New York real estate family. But I have never owned a firearm because I have children. They're grown now, but I just wouldn't have one in my home. I think if you have a home invasion, you run out the other door if you can. You don't start to have a warfare.
Yes, Professor, you spoke about Texas, borderline states, and the issue of migration. And I wanted to ask because I remember maps of counties during last presidential elections 2020. And I remember, for example, Texas, of course, very red state, very conservative state. But we start to see this very, very thin right now, blue line near the borderland in Texas. And how would you explain that? It is because those migrants, maybe they're getting their civil rights in America and starting to vote for Democrats. We know why they vote for Democrats, because Democrats are pro-minority, and they rather support social spendings. And what might be the case in this example?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that there is that blue line. That depends on whom one interviews. It has not been enough
Mhm.
time for the illegal migrants to register to vote, and there hasn't been a voting. So I don't know if that's the explanation. Uh, the immediate border area, with the exception of large ranch owners, tends to be Hispanic American. But I believe that Hispanic American is heavily red, heavily conservative now, and you could say that this is the idea of coming into the country and closing the door behind you, but nobody who's gone to all the trouble of naturalization in the United States, legal naturalization, really wants somebody else to just come in and take what they've worked hard to achieve. Now, I don't
Mhm.
I don't believe that there is a blue line. I believe that Texas is becoming more and more a red state and more conservative. But time will tell. We'll have to see in the forthcoming elections.
Yes, I'm almost 100% sure. I am 100% sure there was this blue line because I really do remember that. But of course, that might depend on what source we use also. And I would like to talk about another Democrat, Joe Manchin, very famous Democrat right now, because he's well known for contesting the official party line. And we see this, for example, with Build Back Better Act, which was basically stopped by Joe Manchin himself in the Senate. And I would like to ask you, how do you assess this attitude of Joe Manchin? This how he conducts his role in Senate, his policy, and how can we explain his behavior? What is his future in the Democratic Party, in your opinion, of
Yes.
course?
Well, Joe Manchin, of course, is a is a Democratic senator from West Virginia, which historically was a heavily Democratic state. Now it's a heavily Republican state. It's turned from blue to red. His future, probably to reverse the order of your questions, his future almost certainly would be with the Republican Party, but so far he hasn't changed because that would impact his committee membership and probably his seniority on committees. Also, you have to take into account Senator Sinema, Kristen Sinema from a Democrat from Arizona, also not as quite as red as West Virginia. She has backed up Joe Manchin. Now, Joe Manchin has been heroic in many ways because the last thing one wants to do is to change time-tested rules by the flavor of the current tide. And the filibuster in the Senate always has been designed to keep uh, a a bare majority from being able to shove their own agenda, their policies down the throats of everyone else to make sure that if you do make major changes in policy, that's the wishes of a wider majority of politicians representing a wider majority of citizens. Joe Manson knows that if he had not done that, almost certainly he'd be defeated next election. Whether he will be defeated now, I don't know. He's shown enormous heroism. And remember that over the years, the Democratic Party has used the filibuster. We have to define what a filibuster is. Someone gets up and starts speaking, and in the Senate, one cannot, except for a two-thirds cloture vote, one cannot stop them. So usually, if it's evidence of filibuster, the leadership will take the bill that's being filibustered off for the moment. And the Democrats have used the filibuster many more times than the Republicans. And when the Republicans, very unwisely, in my opinion, over the past decade or two, have now and then thought about changing the filibuster, where the Democratic Party, the leadership, have vehemently opposed that. Now suddenly they want to change it, but not permanently. Of course, they don't want to change it permanently because they want in the future to be able to use it. What they want to do is to simply change it for the moment so they can ram through the Senate a series of bills that would absolutely divest the states of their ability to supervise elections in a fair manner. What they want, as you just said, would be for every illegal immigrant and everyone else who wants to simply run from state to state, walk in with ballot after ballot, and make the Democratic leadership at least stay on forever.
Yes, and we have to admit that even if there is no filibuster in Senate, the Democratic Party still has some problems with achieving this simple majority with Senator Manchin and Sinema, right?
Correct. But of
Another
course,
Democratic senator.
right, and then there are
Yes,
some
please.
what was called rhinos. Their initial capitals, Republicans in name only, RINO,
Mhm.
rhinos. Mitt Romney comes to mind there, possibly a few other Republican senators, also the senator from Idaho, Bush, I guess, and so on some issues. It may be that the Democratic leadership can pick up Republicans to fill the void created by Manson and Sinema, but then so far they've been unable to do that on the procedural votes, such as the filibuster and their bizarre voting. Proposals. So far, Manson, particularly followed by Sinema, has become a national hero, even within some ranks of the Democratic Party. Moderate senators there who do not really want these changes, but they feel that they don't want to stand out because they feel that's dangerous for their own careers within the party and with their Democratic voters.
Speaking about political danger, Professor, in November there will be another midterm elections of 2022. And we have to assess the Republican chances because we already said that Democratic Party has some troubles right now. And I would like to ask about the Republican chances right now.
Well, I personally believe that barring some extraordinary event that can always tip a political scale at the last minute, that it's going to be a Republican landslide victory in both the House and the Senate. And with that victory, of course, in the House by Nancy Pelosi, who also has been very, very divisive, a little bit less less obviously so than Biden, because she doesn't quite have the she doesn't have the medical challenges that Biden has, and she doesn't have quite uh, the the news conference attraction that a president has. But my guess is that it'll be a Republican landslide victory, and that there will be a leader in the House. Now that may bring about some additional problems, because if you have the House and the Senate heavily Republican, there'll be the the idea of impeaching both Biden and Harris first, and not allowing a replacement because that requires a Senate confirmation, and then the Speaker of the House, who by then would not be Pelosi, would become the president. That could easily be Kevin McCarthy or another Republican leader who would challenge Kevin McCarthy. What it could do is to throw the Republicans into a frenzy, and what it also could do would mean that that new Republican speaker turned president would have a tremendous advantage against anyone else, including Donald Trump, who might, I think, almost certainly from his recent rally in Texas, would be planning to make a run in 2024. Of course, a new speaker president might decide not to run, but that's very wishful, I think, in terms of our thought.
If we talk about the Republican takeover in U.S. Congress after the midterm elections 2022, how do you think, how probable are those solutions, as which you already mentioned?
Well, I think that they would be very improbable, but for the double effort to impeach President Trump. So the Republicans, I think, will try to strike. Already, there's a on the right wing news in the United States. There's an 800 number to dial to demand that Biden resign. Now, I don't know exactly where that's coming from, because Biden resigns, Harris becomes president, and she's very much unknown. That's one of the reasons for her low poll ratings. I don't know what Harris would be like as a president. She could rise to the occasion and be fairly good. She could be much worse than Biden. She hasn't done much of anything at all. But then again, historically, almost no vice president ever has done very much of anything at all during their predecessor's term, during the president's during their term. So sometimes they inherit the presidency, sometimes they rise to the occasion. So I mean, I would not sign a "Dear Joe, get out" message at this juncture, because Harris is younger. She would be around longer. She's much more untested. I don't know what her team would be. Biden's team is a mixed bag. They range from fairly good track records. Susan Rice, for example, as UN ambassador to Obama, and then as national security advisor to Obama. I feel she has a good track record. Her track record now isn't very good in the White House, and some of the other people that Biden has selected are awful. But hers might be worse.
Focus. Harris might be worse. Yes, I do agree. This might, but could be, of course. Looking also at what she has done as vice president, that's not very optimistic for the U.S.
Absolutely not. And when the president Biden asked her to become the border czar, so to speak, right, the border czar, she basically never went to the border, because very
Yes.
obviously she doesn't want to be associated with the border. Just like in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the when Biden arrived there last week, one of the bridges near Frick Park collapsed. Nobody was killed, but about 10, 12 people were severely injured. Bus went over the ravine. And when Biden went there, not one Democratic politician of any consequence, the governor, the attorney general, the mayor of Pittsburgh's a blue town, right? Not the lieutenant governor, not any of them went to meet Biden. They all suddenly had scheduling conflicts. Well, of course, that was well planned. No one wants Biden not even Stacey Abrams in Georgia wants Biden beside of them because he will draw them down like a sinking
Yes.
swimmer. He won't build them up.
Yeah, 33% says it all. Professor, speaking about ambassadors, let's move on to another part of our talk today, which is foreign policy, your specialization, I say.
Yeah, it is what I teach.
Yes. Yes, I do know Professor Jones teaches that. And of course, I would like to ask. Yes, I would like to ask you about the newest ambassador to Poland, Mr. Mark Brzezinski. Of course, we know his father, also his grandfather. But I would like to ask you, what should we expect from Mr. Brzezinski as he begins his journey here in Poland? Maybe from this maybe a little different perspective for you, I would like to ask what Poles can expect or should expect from a new ambassador.
Well, first of all, I think that Mark Brzezinski is an example of Biden at his best. I think he's an excellent choice to be U.S. ambassador to Poland. I greatly, deeply respected his father, Zbigniew Brzezinski. We compare the polls of presidents. Jimmy Carter didn't do very well in the polls, but in many respects, he was a decent president, and unlike the current president, his character was very high. No corruption surrounding Carter himself, his brother a little bit, but not himself. And Zbig, in Polish would be Spacek, but in American English, Zbig Brzezinski was a wonderful national security advisor. And Mark was a very fine U.S. ambassador to Sweden. So I would project that he will do very well as America's envoy to Poland. I've been in Poland since 2005, and I knew Victor Ash, who was George W. Bush's roommate at Yale. I knew Victor and Joan, his wife, very, very well. I was probably at the ambassador's residence 40 times during his period in the second George W. Bush administration, and he carried over for a year in Obama. That's how good he was here. And then his successor, Lee Feinstein, I consider to be a very fine friend. Also, I was probably at the ambassador's residence 20 times with him. With Steve Moll, who followed Feinstein, I was there once. He and I did not get on. Paul Jones, I was never there, although we met some other places, and he was very friendly. I never met Babashar, President Trump's ambassador. I think that Mark Brzezinski, his background, his overall qualifications, yes, his name recognition and his ties to Poland will stand him extraordinarily well as United States ambassador to Poland. I wish him the best, and I think we will receive the best from it.
And Professor, we have, of course, new ambassador in Poland, American ambassador. In a few days, probably we will have another American ambassador in Ukraine. But also, I would like to ask, speaking about Ukraine, of course, I would like to ask about the relations between the US and Russian Federation. Because we have been following the issue of relations meetings between American diplomats with Russian counterparts. We know that today on Tuesday probably will be another call from Antony Blinken to Sergei Lavrov concerning concerning those issues of Russian aggression, possible Russian aggression to Ukraine. I would like to ask you, how do you assess these talks with the Russian Federation and the whole case of Ukrainian safety or the Russian danger right now?
Well, I certainly believe that it's important for state sovereignty to be maintained. I hope that President Putin reconsiders further advances into Ukraine. But the relationship between the United States of America and the Russian Federation, which is derivative of the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union during World War II, it largely has been a strong relationship. I'd like that to continue. You know, right now, the Republicans, especially the conservative Republicans, are vehemently opposed to sending any kind of American troops into Ukraine. They feel that that's unnecessary to do, provocative of the Russian Federation. And we do have to realize that President Putin's hands are tied a little bit, right? They're tied a little bit because of the fact that he just cannot afford, from his perspective, to have NATO, you call it NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, encroach more on the Soviet territory. Remember what Ukraine means in Russian. It means marchland. It's a borderland. And after the Battle of Kursk in World War II, the Russians do not ever want Western tanks near what they consider to be Holy Russia, Tsataris. They want the Ukraine to be a buffer zone. So they do not want it to be part of NATO. And I think we have to respect that. That's my view. That's the Republican view. The Democratic view is the opposite, seems to be. Now, Tony Blinken, some Republicans feel he's lightweight. I think he's credible. I have enormous respect for Sergei Lavrov as the Russian Federation foreign minister. Not my foreign minister, but I have respect for him. When I taught 5 years in Estonia before coming to Poland, and I knew Konstantin Pravalov, the Russian ambassador there, very, very well. So well that when the deputy foreign minister was visiting, he came to me during a banquet in the corner. And he asked me, what do you think Pravalov is like as an ambassador? I told him, I think he represents your country remarkably, and he's outstanding. And he thanked me very much for that. And then from out behind the curtain came Pravalov, a very large man, larger even than Professor Bates. And he gave me a big hug, and he said, "Spasibo Bolshaya, thank you very, very much." But he was a fantastic ambassador. So what's my point? My point is that the United States has to have the respect that the Russian Federation deserves. We don't go to war unnecessarily if it does not involve our interests. And our interests, I don't believe, and most of the Republican leadership does not believe right now, directly involve Ukraine. We can supply some armaments, but it's Europeans. It's a European battle, and if Germany and France don't want to do it, I understand that Boris Johnson, the UK now, has put his armed forces on alert for deployment, and we've put the 101st Airborne Division on Fort Campbell, Kentucky, on alert for possible deployment. Part of it, but I must tell you this: that after the 9/11 situation, I was sitting in a Russian restaurant in Tallinn, Estonia, and Ambassador Pravalov was sitting, I think, 2 tables away. And I noticed he got up and he talked with some people. And then soon they on their music system they played orally, which is the anthem of the 101st Airborne Division. The relationship between the United States and the Russian Federation has been a strong one. Sometimes it's vacillated, but you don't want to do something to make that turn terribly wrong. If you asked me, would I advise a president to go to war or risk war with Russia over Ukraine? My answer would be vehemently no. Absolutely don't even consider it. It's too foolish.
Yes, I remember Joe Biden said he will not send troops to Ukraine, that Americans will not die for Ukraine. But at the same time, he arms Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian army. But you said that the free world should respect Russia's claims on Ukraine, right? I would like to ask if giving this permission, let's call it, to Putin to take Ukraine, because we cannot forget there is a war, there is a war which has been waged since 2014 over Crimea, Donbass. Isn't it like if the free world, the West, will give permission to Putin, he will take the whole Ukraine, and then he might even want to take other countries like Poland and other countries of the Baltic region, because we know that Putin's main goal is to restore the old USSR. This is what he said, like in 2006 or 7, and this is what also Leon Panetta, former CIA director, has said in 2016, that Putin just wants to restore the old USSR.
Well, it's well known that President Putin felt that the worst calamity of the 20th century, the last century, was the fall of the Soviet Union. He probably would like to restore it. That, coupled with the strong European Union international ties and North Atlantic Treaty Organization, all of that, I don't think that Putin would ever invade the European community itself, meaning Poland. I think that he has his sights set on Belarus, once Lukashenko leaves power one way or another, probably dies, he's aging. And there is some pressure. Remember, both Putin and Xi Jinping in China, in their own ways, are nationalists. And there's some pressure by nationalist voters in Russia for Putin to protect Russian-speaking, Russian culture people in extreme eastern Ukraine. And so if he were to advance, my guess is he would advance only in those provinces where there is a heavy Russian population. Now, that said, I have personal friends, including students in classes at University of Warsaw currently from those areas, and they are hoping that President Putin will not do that. They would rather have, they believe that Ukraine is their sovereignty, and even though their ethnicity is Russian, they do not want that kind of conflict. So I don't know what the pretext or the justification would be. I don't think we have anything on the immediate horizon to worry about with Putin invading Poland. But as Robert Frost, the American poet, said, good fences make good neighbors. And I have no objection to the Americans shoring up the eastern border of the European community. I think that's very good for the EU. It was terrifically good for Germany when we had a lot of troops there. And if they want to fortify the NATO training base, the Joint Forces NATO base at Bogotá, places like that, be my guest. That I don't feel is provocative, but to advance NATO into Ukraine, I think would be a horrible mistake, and to commit American lives, boots on the ground in Ukraine, I think is a terrible mistake and very, very unwise.
Professor, right now I would like to ask you more about American side of this dispute, let's call it right now, on this diplomatic territory right now, because Antony Blinken usually or very often says that the US is prepared for severe, swift, and severe consequences if Russia attacks Ukraine, but I have never heard any kind of details in this regard. Do you think the US has the details, or it is just some very basic, simple, let's call it threatening the enemy not to behave in certain way?
A little bit of both, Jan, I believe. Certainly, the United States has contingency plans. They've been in place for years. They've been updated and upgraded by Obama, by Trump, and probably by some of the Biden team. But the real question is, what would Biden do? Of course, we've had plans in place for years for the appropriate withdrawal from Afghanistan, a place that undoubtedly the United States of America never should have been to in the first place. It's not an international police organization now, is it? Right? So it's not Interpol, for example. What what the whatever plans the United States had in Afghanistan, the Biden people just turned tail and ran. They've left about 150 American civilians there because, of course, the civilians should have left before the military did. So I don't think it matters what plans we have. It matters what plans we would implement and how effectively execution would be. I mean, this is true in management, isn't it? You can have all kinds of discussions in a boardroom, but how well the CEO can execute a plan for the benefit of a company is the telltale sign of the quality of the caliber of the CEO. So, and with Biden, his experience in Afghanistan has been awful. And so I just would not want to see him go in to a place such as Ukraine because I'm afraid that there wouldn't be an effective exit plan, or if the exit plan would turn disastrous the way Afghanistan did.
Yes, indeed. And I would like to ask another question, maybe looking at this relation between the US and the Russian Federation in some broader image. And of course, I mean the relations with China, People's Republic of China, and this so called race of superpowers. What is
Well,
your assessment on that? Is this, let's say, soft response from the American side right now dictated by maybe something more, maybe by looking in this broader image? I mean, counting on so-called benevolent neutrality of the Russian Federation in possible conflict or race with the People's Republic of China.
well, when I was in Estonia, I was a good friend of China's ambassador to Estonia at the time, Cheng Jun, and she was Chen Yi, Marshal of China, five-star general, Marshal of China's youngest child, his daughter. And Chen Yi never trusted the Russians. The relationship between the Soviet Union, and the same with the Russian Federation, and China is one of what we call in political science, international relations, that of a frenemy, meaning
Mhm.
friend one day, enemy another. The So what we have to do is to be very careful that our policy, the United States policy, does not drive Russia and China together. There's some movement towards each other recently. We don't want to add to that, much less put a firecracker at the end of the tails of each one of them to force them to come together. That's not to our advantage. And I'm afraid that going into Ukraine could trigger that. Now, the Republican posture is I'm independent now. Remember, I am a very independent voter. And in the last election, I voted for candidates from both parties. I highly respect a Democratic senator from my home state. So, but the the Republican position is that People's Republic of China is the biggest threat to the United States of America because of its growing military. Now, some Republicans, one a couple of days ago on, I think it was Newsmax or Fox News, said the Russian Federation is a filling station, a gas station, masquerading as a country. Well, I certainly do not believe that the Russian Federation, Svятая Rus, Holy Russia, is a filling station. It makes much of its money on exporting natural gas or petroleum products. But I don't want, with its nuclear arsenal and with its long history of friendship with the United States, I do not want to cast it away. I'm afraid that if you do that, then any country is going to seek an alliance, and it will seek its stronger alliance with China. I'd rather keep it more neutral. I'd rather keep it aligned one way or another with Europe, with the United States. I believe that, as I said before today, Europe, it's European responsibility to deal with Ukraine, not an American one. And I also believe that the large trade that the United States had with China before all this mess happened, before the tariffs, before the embargoes, before the pandemic, that was a good thing. Remember that the Soviet Union and the West, not just the United States, the West, at most was 5% of its trade. And that was the last couple of years before the implosion of the Soviet Union. Before that was 1 to 1.5%. With China, it's been over a quarter, a third, in some sectors, economic sectors, half and more. So with the West and particularly with the United States. I think that we need to step back, take time out, and reassess everything. Now, one of the factors that I think helps the West is the recent defection of the Chinese rocket scientist with a good deal of almost like Nunn's story, what he has to say in charity. He's talking about China's new ordinance. And apparently the assessment in the West is that his information has set China's aggression back half a decade, maybe even longer. You see, I don't want aggression by any parties. I simply want economic trade. I want a good, healthy relationship so that if we can stop this arms race, it was never very much good in the Soviet period. I don't think it's any good now in the Chinese period. And I certainly don't want it to come between the United States and the Russian Federation. So I think that is the broader picture. It's one that we have to be very careful of. Not just China, but the rest of Asia, Japan, South Korea, North Korea is a very shaky place. The ASEAN countries, Association of Southeast Asian Nations countries, and of course the Republic of China in on the island for most of Taiwan. And I'm afraid that right now, let me just add one more point. That right now, the United States is probably, I mean, never say never, never say always, but probably not equipped to fight another two-front war like it did in World War II, in Europe and in the Pacific and Asia. So if we commit a lot of troops, the 101st Airborne Division is America's crack outfit. We commit a lot of troops in Ukraine or in Europe bordering on Ukraine, then that increases, I think, the chances of China deciding to aggressively take back Taiwan. And I do not want that to happen. Don't want that ever to happen aggressively. I think ultimately the two sides are going to end up coming together. That's not going to be I hope that's not going to become by force, and I don't think that's likely to become a factor in the next decade or so, but it probably will become a factor, at least in your lifetime. And I think that's a good thing. It's Igor Jungor, one China. It is in principle an important factor, but we cannot support aggression by one country against even its own people or its historically owned people. And I, for one, don't understand at all how we can support what China wants to do across Asia, including Taiwan, with the Uyghur situation it has in Xinjiang, its northwest internal province, with what we understand to be American intelligence and British intelligence, even more reliable than the Americans. Secret Intelligence Service, SIS of the United Kingdom, MI6, says that the Uyghur population has been disbanded, put into prison camps. Han Chinese people, men have been made to live with, to in effect marry Uyghur women against their Muslim tradition. There's, with me, as you know from my courses, there's one word above everything else that I stand for, and that's respect. Respect for other countries, respect for other people. If a country doesn't respect its own people, you could say that, you say, David, the United States has not respected black people. Agreed, it has not done that effectively enough. I agree, totally. But that doesn't justify, we haven't imprisoned them. We haven't taken them and forced them to marry us. This is
Yes,
what
as
has
far as I
happened.
know, black people are not in concentration camps in the US right now, and in China,
Not in
there are millions
concentration
of
camps, and
people.
I don't believe they ever have been. Japanese were Manzanar in World War II. I think that that was justified by the democratic Roosevelt administration to protect the existence of the United States. It was sad, and probably the people were honest and law-abiding Americans, but we've never imprisoned, to my knowledge, black Americans. Certainly not doing that now. China apparently is with the Uyghur population, and I think that's wrong.
I hope we will touch more of those US-China relations topics in the following episodes of American Alert and of our talks here, also with Professor David Jones. But right now the time is up for us. So thank you very much, Professor David Jones, public affairs and foreign policy expert, also professor at the University of Warsaw. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Jan, and thank the Warsaw Institute and the program Current Challenges of American Politics. My pleasure.
Thank you very much. Also, thank you to our patrons. Especially, I would like to thank Mr. Michał Przygoda for supporting us. Also, we do recommend you to support Warsaw Institute if you would like to watch another episodes, more programs and talks with experts like Professor Jones. And also, we would like to recommend you looking at our social media profiles: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. Everything will be linked below the video. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor, one more time, and I hope to see you soon in American Alert.
Thank you very much.
Take care.